Yo, this is Russ R. Russell, and this is why the late 90s and early 2000s were great. These were the best years of my life, and so do millions of people, for many different reasons, on many different occasions, in many different areas. And I'm gonna explain it. But before I do, I'm gonna give it to Wizard Eye on why Nintendo 64 made the late 90s and early 2000s great.
Nintendo 64 was Nintendo's very first product to jump from 2D to 3D. It was actually amazing. The biggest jump in video game history. Not only had they skipped the 32-bit, unlike their competitors Sega and Sony, they went straight to the 64-bit, naming the Nintendo 64. Some question whether or not the system was actually 64 bits. Regardless, the graphic was impressive with the polygon looking beautiful. However, Nintendo set a lot of limitation to the Nintendo 64, especially when their competitor was using disk space. Nintendo was still using cartridges, in their turn, game pack, and which hold little information compared to their competitor with their disc. The development began in 1993 in partnership with Silicon Graphics while using the codename Project Reality. Then later it was called Ultra 64, which the final name eventually became the Nintendo 64. Oh yeah, Nintendo later released the expansion pack to increase the Nintendo 64 RAM from 4 MB to 8 MB for improved graphic and better functionality. Such games like The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask and Donkey Kong 64 is required to use the expansion pack to fully experience the game. During the launch of the Nintendo 64, they only have 2 launch titles, 3 in Japan. While their competitor Sony have 8 launch games, Nintendo was relying on Super Mario 64 and Pilot Wing 64 to sell the system. But even so, Nintendo 64 total sales was like 1/3 compared to Sony. Super Mario 64 actually sold out, especially when the Nintendo 64 came to the USA. It was immediately sold out. It was like the most selling system at launch at the time. Though many may not be familiar with Pilot Wing 64, it was still a great flight simulator. But the one title, Super Mario 64, as many have considered the greatest game of all time, launched Nintendo in a whole new level. And to this day is still celebrated as many speedrun the game and create mods so they can recreate that experience. Super Mario 64 is the most influential game of all time as it set the expectation of what a 3D game is supposed to be experienced like. And it was literally the foundation for a lot of games to look at. It also set the standard for cameras. Square Enix has stated that a coincidental meeting with Disney employees were sought in the creation of the Kingdom Hearts series. Inspired by Super Mario 64 use of 3D environment and exploration, Mario games take inspiration like Super Mario Sunshine, Super Mario Galaxy 1 and 2, and recently in Super Mario Odyssey. It was the first video game to be sold for over millions of dollars, $1.56 million. Still with a respectable number of units sold, it was the first video game generation where Nintendo lost, and lost as the leading company when it comes to video games. Though their handheld was still going strong, especially on the rise of Pokemon. Nintendo 64 may have lost their foothold when it comes to the home console system. The legacy of the Nintendo 64 had brought some of the most pioneer games out there, which include Banjo-Kazooie, with their impressive graphic, cool ideas, and they broke the boundary as most of the texture in Nintendo 64 games is 64 by 64. Rareware sort of a brilliant way by breaking up such textures to make it such like a larger texture, like quintilla painting, where one might think that it's one big texture, but it's actually divided by 4 if one pay attention. Even so, Banjo Tooie kind of used one of the sectors, and it's kind of weird how the way it looks, but still. Rare was very smart to overcome the limitation of the Nintendo 64, and they bring out such great games like GoldenEye 007 and Perfect Dark. They even bring games like Hunger Fur Day, which is Nintendo's most controversial game, but still the most. Well, actually, it's the most frustrating out of all the Nintendo 64 game I played, but it is still fun. Blockbuster. Blockbuster in the 1990s was like such a golden era, especially movies like Titanic being released and Star Wars Episode 1. Their store was the most gorgeous out of any of the time that Blockbuster was out, especially with posters and designs inside the buildings. And especially when Sony and Nintendo have their systems out, golden, especially the merchandise. So much cool video game merchandise, so much cool movies. Despite with Sony and Sega having their discs 1/3 bigger the size of their memory compared to Nintendo 64 with their 4 megabyte, with such limitation brings such creativity. Games like Star Fox 64, Banjo-Kazooie, Hunger Fur Day wouldn't be possible, and the charm that it brings, along with Super Mario 64, it wouldn't be possible when limitations around. I know without limitations, such ideas and such things that wasn't possible, stuff like the water effects, skybox, how much polygon can be present, how can we hide such glitches, or how can we solve such problems, and how can we make this look beautiful, bring charms, bring creativity, heart and soul to the video games, compared to video game now where it's like mostly like, but it looks soulless at times, where they have such beautiful graphic, but one could feel like the emptiness at the same time. Compared with the Nintendo 64 charm, where you could see the heart.
One of the main reasons why I love talking about video games from the PlayStation 1, Nintendo 64 and Sega Saturn era is the way developers would overcome challenges based on the hardware that they were working with.
In one Nintendo game series that really shined in the Nintendo 64 era was The Legend of Zelda, and especially The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. It introduced a revolutionary mechanic like the lock-on. It got the introduction of Ganondorf, Nintendo's second biggest villain. And as of 2024, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time have the highest score on Metacritic with the score of 99. And they had another game in that era that truly shine, or should I say darken, was Majora's Mask. It is a very unique Nintendo 64 game and the darkest The Legend of Zelda game ever, which had a time-based mechanic which brings many what-if events. And a lot of future Zelda games take inspiration from these two games. And for a while, it seems like it was their standards. Now we move on to Pokemon. Yes, Pokemon, which is number one of most merchandise selling in the world. And it was around the late 90s. And it introduced Pokemon Red and Blue. And Red and Blue total sales reached over 31 million copies. According to Joseph Tobin, it was the most successful computer game of all time. And during that time, Pokemon had their first movie, Pokemon the First Movie, which grossed $172.7 million. At the time, it broke Mortal Kombat record, which was 23.2 million for the highest weekend debut for a video game adaptation. And Pokemon was like hot at that time. Many will call it Pokemania. Pokemania went wild across all schoolyards when it comes to the Pokemon cards in video games, like trading or battling. Even schools banned Pokemon. That's how much popular it was. It was just a community game. And it had this experience that those who were born after the hype will never experience the first time thrill. It was truly amazing. And a video game system that debuted during the late 90s was PlayStation. Yes, PlayStation. The PlayStation 1 contained games like Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon. It was really good. It's what started this whole PlayStation series. Like PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, PSP, PlayStation 3. And it was the system that even had Final Fantasy VII, the most over Final Fantasy game ever. Yes. And then Sega introduced the Dreamcast. The Dreamcast was, at the time, a very powerful system. It left a mark to the point that pop culture still referenced Sega Dreamcast. Needy Girl Overload have referenced the Dreamcast controller. That's how iconic the Dreamcast is. Homebrews still being made for the system. All these games still being released in the Dreamcast is a legacy like the Nintendo 64 that still lives on. Dreamcast games are easier to port over and easy to make games. Homebrew community take advantage on that. And then it got the VMU, Virtual Memory Unit. It is a Tamagotchi device, which the Tamagotchi and Pokemon was pretty popular in the late 90s. Therefore, Sega took advantage of their popularity and used it as a feature for the controller, which is crazy. 2K Sport Games made a genius thing where they hide the strategy for player 2. That way, player 1 doesn't know what player 2 is plotting. Sadly though, Sega stopped their console business in 2001 and become a third-party publisher, which pretty similar to WCW bankruptcy in 2001. Which is interesting how Sega and WCW were challenger to Nintendo and WWE with their respective wars, the console war and the Monday Night Wars. But yes, the Sega Dreamcast had their mascot Sonic the Hedgehog great to their peak. You got Sonic Adventure 1, which introduced the modern Sonic look. It was really great. It got a story that was really well done. And it even got the Child Garden, which feels like a game of its own, to be honest. And in the Dreamcast era as well, Sonic got Sonic Adventure 2, which introduced Shadow the Hedgehog, the second most popular Sonic character ever, and the story was better than Sonic Adventure. It was really good. A lot of people still think about that game to this day, as many view it as the peak, and future Sonic games took the inspiration, the style that it have. But enough with the video games. Let's go with wrestling, especially in WWE, the Attitude Era in the late 90s, early 2000s. It had the highest rated WWE Raw, which holds a 8.1 rating on May 10th, 1999. According to Sonic Monster, the year 2000 was WWE peak in terms of crowd reaction, which introduced many new types of matches like the Cell match, TLC, First Blood, and then you got the greatest wrestler of all time being in that era, and that is Stone Cold Steve Austin. Even so, he debuted in 1995 as Ringmaster. He will be Stone Cold in 1996 and is considered the greatest wrestler of all time. And whenever he appears, it will be the highest crowd reaction. And he won 3 Royal Rumbles in 1997, 1998, and 2001. And he became champion 3 times in WrestleMania and 3 times in Raw for 1998, 1999, and 2001. What a formation that is. And not many people could say they win at WrestleMania like that. And then win in Raw. And he also started it, the What chant, which is used to this day. And that wrestlers had to beat the test of what. But WWE wasn't great because of Stone Cold Steve Austin. It was also great because it had The Rock, the most electrifying superstar, and was considered number 2. Some would say he was number 1. He popularized the word SmackDown, which had been used officially as the English language on July 10, 2007, and it became the name of WWE's second biggest show, SmackDown. By July 21st, 2002, he broke the record of becoming the most WWE champion during the time, and it was very impressive. Also, in the late 90s and early 2000s, it was the period of the Monday Night Wars, just like the console wars. WCW was competing against WWE, and even so, it was not good by that time. It still had an interesting ratings. But sadly, WCW Access got purchased by WWE in 2001. WCW and Sega, which was once the biggest challenger, was coincidentally done by 2001, which ends of an era. And it surely did feel like that after 2002. Oh yeah, and let's have a word from Mick Foley, who would like to share some things. Hit it.
Hello there, Russell. Russell, it's the hardcore legend, Mick Foley. And again, I don't know how that request was declined. Just an accident on my part. I was actually happy to hear from you, and now I have the chance to talk a little bit about the Attitude Era. First of all, in case you're wondering, this is a shirt, my dog, Woofle. Yeah, it's a good custom-made shirt, just in case so you don't spend your whole time wondering, I wonder what's on Mick's shirt. Russell, I was so fortunate to have been there in the Attitude Era even though the credit is usually for 1998, in my opinion, the Attitude Era began in 1997 when Vince McMahon gathered all the talent and admitted that the things that had worked in the past, some of those one-dimensional characters, were not going to work in the future, and that if we were going to survive and thrive, they were going to survive, but thrive, the men and women had to start putting more of themselves into the characters. And I think that we had that freedom to experiment. And also, I've talked about this on a few occasions, the freedom to fail. Sometimes in sports, I remember a hockey player telling me under a certain coach, he was playing not to fail instead of playing to succeed. And you can't do that. So we had that opportunity to try things out, see what worked. For example, my partnership with The Rock, very little was actually like given to us as far as scripting interviews. We were free to riff on each other and try some things out. For example, if it had been in a script that Mick is going to start copying The Rock's catchphrases, it probably would have never made it to the ring because he would have been, that's not a good idea. And instead we did it, we played off each other, and we got some great reactions out of it. And the matches, man, you had some real workhorses in there. Austin, Triple H really came alive during the Attitude Era. Shawn Michaels was amazing, but he was really pre and post Attitude Era, if that makes sense. You know, like he left in '98, right? WrestleMania, when he wrestled Austin, yeah, and with the big thing with Tyson, and we were off to the races because we had Austin, we had Undertaker, we had Triple H, we had Rock. I was in that group. Kane, Goldust. I mean, the Goldust character may have been a precursor of the Attitude Era because nobody had seen anything like that when he debuted in '95, right? Because I was debuted in '96, the day after his backlot brawl with Roddy Piper, which was really cool stuff. I just want to make sure that I'm actually recording. And then there's of course, there's the teeth. That's why I don't feel bad about not wearing the flipper, because the flipper is uncomfortable. And I give myself the excuse to not wear it because it's part of wrestling history. That's right. Somewhere in America is the earring I gave my daughter with my tooth on it. She says she doesn't know where it is. That thing would be worth some money. But then again, they could probably then take my DNA. Yeah, no, I don't think they're going to clone me. There's only one Mick Foley, right, Russell? Hey, I really appreciate you being a big fan. I think it's awesome.
But wrestling wasn't just hot on television. You also got cartoons. It was Cartoon Network peak, which they haul a great constant called Cartoons Fridays, which made great television ratings from 1996 to 2009. And you got Nickelodeon, which it was also its peak. By the mid-1990s, the network had become the #1 cable channel, which was measured by total daily viewers. And they aired so many great shows, like the Rugrats. And heck, and in 2001, they aired 2 great shows, like Fairy Odd Parents and Invader Sim. They were racking up good shows compared to nowadays. But the one show that really stand out most was SpongeBob SquarePants, which debuted in 1999. Help Wanted It premiered with over 2 million household views, and it became their flagship series overnight. And in 2001, TV Guide listed SpongeBob SquarePants number 9 on 50 greatest cartoon characters of all time. And it would eventually take over Nickelodeon channel almost every time slot was SpongeBob SquarePants, which I couldn't get enough SpongeBob. Also in the late 90s and early 2000s, Extreme Sport was really hot at the scene. And extreme sports was specially featured in TV shows and movies. Like you got Rocket Power, and heck, Goofy made an extreme movie. So yeah, it was like a hype. Like many kids will skate or ride their bikes in the scene. Especially when Tony Hawk popularity was in its highest. Especially when he nailed the first ever 900 at X Games 5 in San Francisco on June 27, 1999, which also in the same year, it was the release of Tony Hawk Pro Skater, which was the start of Activision Sport Revolution games, Activision 02, and it was top notch, even featuring Matt Huffman, Pro BMX, Sean Palmer, Pro Snowboarders, and Kelly Slater, Pro Surfer. And in 1999, the release of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, it was great. There's more Sith Lords, more bad guys. Oh, and they even talk political, which makes it feel so different. And according to George Lucas, he wanted the pre-sequel to feel really different from the original trilogy. Unlike the sequel trilogy, which they used similar planets and same ships. Even so, critics does not like it. It was still awesome for Star Wars fans, as it reunite the hype of Star Wars. And even so, it's not as impactful as the original trilogy. It was still up there. The pre-sequel was just a big event for Star Wars fans, and especially moviegoers alike. And of course, what makes late 90s, early 2000s wonderful was McDonald's. Before making their restaurants to look like office buildings and largely getting rid of their beloved clown mascot, Ronald McDonald, McDonald's was lively and fun. There was playing grounds, a scene like Burgers at Seats. In 1998, McDonald had a show called The Wacky Adventures of Ronald McDonald. It was really awesome. There were kiosks for Nintendo 64 and Nintendo GameCube, making it that arcade feel to it. And they took great effort on kids' meal toys in McDonald's, like Spy Kids 3D, Game Over. There were comics. So yeah, pretty amazing. And growth was so swift in the 1990s that it was said that a new McDonald's opened it somewhere in the world for every 5 hours. It effectively became the most family restaurant by emphasizing affordable food, fun, and flavors that appear to everyone. As much as I love the early 2000s, there was a tragic event. There was a great tragedy that will forever change the world, and that was 9/11. It was just an impact that will forever change people's lives. And when I say the late 90s and early 2000s was changing the world, I meant it. Like before, people will go to Canada and they weren't even questioning if it was a family who wanted to take a vacation. Now, you need a passport to go to places, and security is so tight. And there's always in the back of people's mind at what if tragedy will strike again. It's a very sad yet important event that all took place in the early 2000s. The late 90s and early 2000s is an era that will never be forgotten. Video games, wrestling, cartoon shows, restaurants. It was just like they were making great effort. And the thing too, it was experimental. It was the ages of experiments.